Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you guys and to be in Munich as well. Thank you for the fantastic introduction. Today I'm here to speak about unlocking product success with an entrepreneurial mindset. I'll kind of walk into a little bit around my journey. Like I said, I'm head of product at DAZN, often referred to as DAZN, but let's try and think of it as we're trying to get into the zone. My journey into product started really unconventionally, probably like many of you. It started out in my dorm room at university. I'm dyslexic, so studying the typical way of going through textbooks and trying to regurgitate that information into exams and coursework just wasn't fit for me. And my co-founder, very similarly, just didn't find that traditional way of learning that exciting. So we really saw a problem and we wanted to find a solution for that problem, and that's when Revision app was born. Initially when we launched it, it was a very simple product that was extremely buggy, that had no UX, but it solved the problem of turning our course content into really bite-sized bits of information and essentially multiple choice questions to help you remember some of the content. We launched it among our peers and some of our other students, and even though it's incredibly buggy, little to no UX, people were downloading it and they were using it, and they were using it every day. And we realized that actually we may be onto something here if people are kind of willing to push through this terrible product. Skip forward a couple of years, we decided to run with it full time, went through a few rounds of funding, built the team out. I initially was heavily focused on the marketing side of things. I thought launching a product, the main thing that you needed to do was to kind of get people to download it. But I'm absolutely terrible at marketing. I did that for a few years. We spent a lot of money on some of my very crappy campaigns. But then the product was still growing. We were getting a lot of traction, and that was my first real insight into product-led growth. And then I pivoted my role. I was largely focused on actually building a product that had a lot of value, that customers did want to come onto, that people did want to share. And that's when we really focused on what are some of the features that we're building, how are people feeling when they're using our product, who are the people that are paying for it, is it the parents, is it the students? And that was my first real dive into product, and when my passion for product and solving problems for customers really grew. Skip forward a few years, like Thomas just said, that we managed to scale to 5 million users across 8 different regions. And then after the success of Revision app, I took some time out. I spent my summer playing Pokemon Go. And then I was really ready to kind of dive back into the world of product. And that's when I started working really closely with startups and some medium-sized businesses, and now I find myself at DAZN. We're probably known here more for Bundesliga. You may watch some of the biggest boxing matches in the world. We had AJ a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure if anybody watched that fight. But I really got to dig deep into the product side of things and solving problems and not being so focused on the firefighting side of running a business. But what I did find that attributed to some of the success that I was having in my career, and that was whether I was getting a promotion or whether I was getting a job or whether I was getting more access to bigger teams, and whether I was kind of getting a lot of buy-in. And that was some of the characteristics that I carried with me from running my business into my career as a product manager. And today I'm going to kind of walk through some of those core characteristics of having an entrepreneurial mindset and how we can use some of these things to really drive success for our companies, for our teams, for our products, and also just for ourselves as individuals. I'm going to walk through some of these and just want you to keep these in mind when I'm jumping through some of the other categories moving forward. A big, massive thing for me that I needed when I was an entrepreneur and running my business was being self-motivated. You didn't have a manager that was on your back, that if you didn't do your job very well, you'll get fired. There was no one kind of championing you. A lot of people probably don't really believe in your idea at the beginning, so I really had to find that inner strength to be really self-motivated. Taking risks, a big one. That's all we did in the beginning, was take loads of risks. I felt like in the beginning I was quite fearless. I didn't really care what people thought too much, and that really played into my favor because I was willing to experiment. I was willing to put things out there and get as much feedback as possible. Being innovative and being able to push boundaries and being really brave. Again, I think the only reason why we got so much success with the products is because we were really happy to put things out there, get lots of feedback and try things that people hadn't tried before. Particularly, this was 15 years ago, I guess people weren't familiar with or comfortable with making big payments on a mobile via an app. So this was something that we were trying to change and push forward. Being resourceful was a massive skill that we had to really lean into. A lot of the time, we weren't getting paid, but we had to make sure the team got paid, or we didn't have access to all the fantastic product tools that I would have liked access to, so we had to be really resourceful and find ways to create and capture value ourselves. It was also really important for us to differentiate our business, but also differentiate ourselves as founders. When we're looking for investors and investment, they're not only looking at how well your business might perform, but how well you perform as a founder. And this is something that I take into my career now. It's not just what I deliver as a product leader and what features I can put out there, but who am I as an individual? How am I to work with? How do people enjoy working with me? And what's something different that I as an individual can bring to the company? Being really resilient, I cannot stress this enough. Being a founder, you have to be resilient. Like I said, you're constantly fighting fires. There's things that go wrong. There's bad press. There's not getting funding in time. You're launching things and you're losing customers. But it's just being able to continuously push through and having the ability to kind of look through that and just look forward to the future. And then lastly, I think a really big thing for me is being able to identify market and company opportunities. And again, something that I try to do now in my day-to-day is where's the landscape? What does it look like now? What does it look like in the future? And always kind of keeping my head in the game as much as I can. And now I'm going to kind of walk through some of the areas in which I think these characteristics can be carried through and kind of maybe equip you with some of the things that I feel like make really strong product managers, really strong product leaders that can really help drive for your own career success and the success of your products in your companies as well. The image that I have up here today, this is Roger Bannister. He was the first human to ever break the 4-minute mile. The first time anybody got anywhere close to this was around 11 years earlier. A man called William Lang managed to get just outside that 4 minutes running downhill. But everybody thought it was completely impossible to be able to break that 4-minute mile. But Roger Bannister had something different in mind. He fought and trained and competed until he did that. And then something magic happened when he did break that 4-minute mile. 2 weeks later, somebody else broke that 4-minute mile. 3 weeks later, another person broke that 4-minute mile. A month later, somebody else did it. Roger had a vision. He was able to execute on that, and then he unlocked something else for the rest of us as humans. We were able to push and go further as athletes. And this story always kind of sticks into my mind because it's the same mission, the same thing that you do as a founder. You may have a vision that not everybody else can see, but it's just so important to kind of pursue and be persistent and stick through that vision and have a vision in general. And it's the same thing when we're kind of thinking about our products and being product managers and keeping a visionary mind as much as we can and being really future orientated. And I feel like in the day-to-day as us as products, we can be really bogged down with, I need to prep for the demo. I need to, I've got interviews next week. I've got this A/B test that I need to prepare for and get the results back. And we can be really bogged down in the day-to-day, but I find it's really important that we flex those muscles and we do practice blue sky thinking as much as we can. And some of the ways that I feel like I like to do this myself as an individual and with my team is taking time away from the desk. I feel like I have a meeting with someone, it's a fantastic meeting, we've identified a problem, we're thinking about solutions, and then I jump back into another meeting, or I jump into a Teams message. Sometimes now I like to take 15 minutes away from my desk after a core meeting like that and decompress. No headphones, no podcasts, no music, just my own thoughts. And I do the same with my one-on-ones with my team as well. Sometimes let's go and grab a coffee, go for a walk, have our one-on-one, let's get our feet moving, let's move away from just being at our desk. And I feel like that's when sometimes I have the best ideas. You know, sometimes they say when you're in the shower, your best ideas come to you. For me, it's the same thing, getting away from my desk as much as I can. Another thing for me is being a user. As much as I can, I feel like we forget that we're looking at the data behind our product. We're looking at the user feedback, but we forget sometimes that there are really passionate people behind our products. I was lucky enough to go and watch the most recent AJ fight, and there was so much energy in the stadium, and I forget these are the people that are using your products. Go and use your product as much as you can from end to end, not just the part that you're focused on, and use and diversify that learning. Use other products that your users use. On DAZN, we have a lot of influencer marketing. I'm not necessarily into the kind of KSIs and Jake Pauls and influencer world, but it's important for me to be where their customers are. So I try to use Kick or Twitch, and I use their platforms and I listen to their podcasts, so I understand who their users are, and I can start thinking slightly differently about how I build products for them and what the future of influence and boxing and sports looks like. And lastly, I do my best to kind of get my team and myself out of that day-to-day mind. I like to run workshops. It's something that I did really early on in my career, and I would ask my manager, are you happy for me to go and run this workshop? And I do it now with my teams, and I invite various different stakeholders, whether it's the team from finance or marketing or the data team, and I ask everybody to come to those sessions with a magic wand. And that's, what would you build if you had a magic wand? There was no worrying about resources or time or deadline or data or will this work, won't it work? Come to those sessions, have your mind really open, start them early in the morning before we get into calls and emails, and think about what would you build if you had a magic wand. Click. There we go. I think this is my next one. Next one for me is being impactful and proactive. I think there's been times in my career where I've been really, really busy, and I'm working 10-hour days, and then I think to myself, what have I actually achieved at the end of this day or at the end of this week? Have I actually moved the needle on this? Have I actually delivered any value? And I'm like, I don't think I actually have. And then I remember one of my old managers saying to me, be proactive, but make sure you're being impactful as well. And this really stood out for me. And then this is the same when kind of running a business as well. I think it's so important that we're just doing. And as founders, it's so that's all we can do is do. We have to just put that one foot in front of the other. And it's the same when working in product. We can get really complacent, and on our day-to-day, you get stuck again. What's the next meeting? What else are we trying to have? But for me, it's really important that I go into a company and I'll be impactful and proactive. When I first started at DAZN, my role was initially looking after our living room platforms and what acquisition looked like on those platforms. But when I went in, I made sure that I built trust with my stakeholders so that I can go in and make some change. I was very transparent that I know not much about living room devices and I don't know much about the architecture or the landscape of streaming, but I made sure that I went in there and I made myself the expert on that topic. I learned about the history of streaming and how Blockbuster moved over and how Netflix was born and what streaming looks like now and what streaming will look like in 5-10 years in the future. And I made sure that everybody in the company knew what my role was, and that if they had any ideas or they wanted to discuss anything around acquisition and retention side of things, that I'm that person. I did that very early on. And that was part of that trust building exercise as well. I also took initiative and put my hand up. When I was working on the acquisition side of things, we were fantastic at getting customers on board, but we were losing them really quickly. If a customer wasn't activated in the first 3 days, they would just drop off. So I saw a gap. I put my hand up and I said, I'm going to start looking into how we're activating our customers. I'm not going to neglect what I'm doing on the acquisition side of things, but it's so important that the work I'm doing here gets carried on through the product. So then I developed a roadmap and some ideas around how we can activate our customers and keep them on there longer. And they really appreciated me just taking that initiative and kind of being really proactive and seeing the value in that and allowing me to take ownership of that. And I continued to do that throughout my time at DAZN and kind of skip forward 3 years. I went from owning just the living room platform acquisition to now leading 5 of our core markets, our 150 of our growth markets, and our complete pay-per-view offering globally. So there really is some value in just kind of putting your one foot in front of the other and demonstrating your value and just being really proactive. And this kind of leads me on to being on the storytelling side of things. When I first started running my business, we'd speak to investors, we'd try and hire the best engineers and the best UX designers. And whenever my co-founder would tell the story of the business and the story of us as founders, we would get yes all the time. They'd be interested, they'd want to invest, they'd want to join the team. When I would tell the exact same story, I heard no all of the time. And it wasn't until one of our investors said, Millie, you're just terrible at telling stories. You're not engaging anyone, nobody's listening to you, it's all over the place. So I really had to take a step back and think about, how do I really tell the story of who we are? I'm so passionate about what I'm doing. How do I convey that to everybody else? And for me, it was really simple. It's adding a bit of a narrative to what I'm doing. Some ways that I practice this now are adding a beginning and a middle of an end to a story. For me, storytelling is just as important as a founder as it is for products. As a founder, I'm trying to get investment or, like I said, somebody to join our team for lower than we can probably afford to pay them. But as a product manager, you're trying to get buy-in. So that's buy-in for additional resources, buy-in for somebody to join your team, buy-in for you to go ahead and do that initiative that you wanted to do, or buy-in to change a new process. So like I said, one of the ways that I do this is having a real clear narrative to my story. Having a beginning, middle, and end really helps me. The beginning is normally when I have my hook. What's the emotion that I can get from everybody? What's the one strong statement that I can start my story with? And then I've got my middle. That's normally where I build a little bit of tension and dive into the problem a bit more. And then I'll have my end where I start thinking about what's the solution, what's the conclusion to my story, and then how will I carry this on and keep everybody on tenterhooks for part 2 with the results of what I'm putting forward. Another way that I really think about improving my storytelling skills is actually thinking about who I'm telling my story to. The story that I tell to head of finance is very different than the story I tell to the CTO. The brevity in which I tell my story is very different from more senior members of the team to the story that I tell my team. I may go into a lot more detail and dive into the why a lot more. Whereas when I'm speaking to more senior leadership, I may shorten my story a little bit, and it's more focused on the outcome, on what the results of something are going to be. So brevity for me is extremely important. And then lastly, practice and prepping. How I tell my stories. Believe it or not, I'm actually quite a shy person, so practicing my storytelling in front of people is sometimes a no-no for me. But I will record myself, I will write a script and go over it again and again. I'll say it out loud. I've practiced this 100 times at home by myself. And when I do build up that confidence, I will ask for feedback and tell my story in front of people as well. So there is so much power in storytelling to not only get that buy-in when we want a new initiative or we want to take hold of a new roadmap, but whether you're going for that promotion, what's the story? Why should you be the person being promoted? And then lastly, I want to jump into something that's extremely important for me. When I was a founder, it's extremely important for me now, and that's having a growth mindset. The doctor at Stanford University, Caroline Dweck, she did a study on the difference between the success of somebody that has a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And she determined a fixed mindset of somebody to be not really willing to take feedback. Have you ever heard somebody say to you, oh, that's just the way I am, I can't change the way I am? Somebody having that type of mindset versus someone with a growth mindset who's open to feedback, really introspective, willing to change, happy to take on a challenge. And she plucked out 10 students from Stanford University, 5 of which she determined to have a fixed mindset and 5 to have a growth mindset. And she studied them for 5 years and watched them, and she recorded that at the end of her study, those that did have a growth mindset, even though they all started at the same level and they all had the same grade when they started, those with the growth mindset far surpassed those with the fixed mindset when it comes to grades and when it comes to securing that job after graduating. So for me, having a growth mindset is just so imperative and so important. And there's a couple of ways that I practice having this growth mindset, because it doesn't always come naturally. One thing for me is routine. I'm not always motivated to do my work. I'm not always motivated to get up. I'm not always motivated to work out. But if I have my routine, motivation doesn't matter as much. I get up, I make my tea, I put my music on, I get in front of my laptop and I do what I need to do. At the end of the day, I decompress, I may work out, I may Netflix binge, but having a routine for me is just so important. Another thing is challenging yourself. For me, that means inside-outside work. I've just started rock climbing. I find it really hard, but I find it's a fantastic way to challenge myself. It forces me to go and meet new people and network with them, and then I'm practicing that skill of networking. It's also having to think about where I'm putting my hands and feet. It's really making me challenge that problem-solving skills and that future thinking skill as well. So challenge yourself outside of your day-to-day, as well as in your day-to-day. Setting SMART goals, I do this with everything across my life, whether it's my fitness goals, my finance goals, my work goals, absolutely everything. And it's something that I refer to, again, I was looking at my SMART goals that I set 5 years ago, and just the fact that I wrote something down and then I reflected on it, years later, I'd even forgot about them, and you realize how many things you do achieve just by setting that goal, that are really actionable. And then asking for feedback. I ask for feedback at work as often as I can after a meeting from my manager. I ask for feedback from my friends. How did I manage that situation when my other friend was upset? Was I caring enough? Did I ask too many questions? Was I a bit abrasive? And getting that feedback across your entire life then impacts who you are at work and how you manage situations and how you manage people as well. Click. Fantastic. This is a quick example of how I have that growth mindset and how I incorporate that into my day-to-day life. This is an Excel spreadsheet. I spend my life on an Excel spreadsheet. This is an example. I'm trying to improve my leadership skills at the moment. I've managed teams from the beginning of my career to now, but it's something I'm really passionate about, and I feel like it's important for me to do the best for my team, my company, to be a better leader. So I created this spreadsheet here where I can self-assess where I feel like I stand when it comes to self-awareness, decision-making, team building. I pick a point. Am I at the early stage, intermediate, advanced? If I'm at the early stage, what can I do to get to the intermediate? If I'm at the intermediate stage, what can I do to get to the advanced? And I do this with every aspect of my life. Again, my finances, my fitness, my relationships with my friends and family, my UX skills, my financial skills, my product skills, and I self-assess everything as much as I can. I'm more than happy to send this Excel spreadsheet that I have to anybody. It's fantastic. I use it all the time. I've got all of my friends and family using it as well. Click. Fantastic. Last thing I want to touch on is how do we take all of these things that I've just covered and cultivate entrepreneurial environments ourselves as individuals? How do we go forward and actually do that? And for me, it's two-pronged. We've got leading by example as the individual. What can I do on a day-to-day to bring that entrepreneurial spirit into my workplace? Am I leading by example? Am I taking the initiative to go and speak to that customer, even though we probably don't do enough customer research? Am I taking the initiative to over-communicate to some of my stakeholders to build that extra bit of trust? Am I looking at myself as a business owner and looking at the full end-to-end of the product? I know maybe it's not my responsibility to understand what the top of the funnel and some of the SEO looks like, but maybe I should investigate that so I know what our full acquisition funnel looks like. Am I speaking to the other teams? Am I regarding myself as a business owner within my own right and within my product? And then also on the wider scale, how am I encouraging the people around me, whether it's the teams that I'm managing or if it's the teams that I'm just working with as my core stakeholders? How am I encouraging them to do the same thing? Am I encouraging them to be curious? Do they feel comfortable asking me why? Do they feel comfortable asking me questions? Have I made them feel comfortable enough that I can ask them questions and they know that I'm not interrogating them? Am I creating a culture of exploring, again, whether you're an individual and you're just starting out or whether you're a leader in the company? Are you creating an environment where people feel like they can innovate and do their best to drive growth? Click. Perfect. And just to recap on some of the things that I've covered, if there's anything you can kind of take away from this, the first one is just, be bold and be future-orientated. What does the future look like? What does the next 5, 10, 15 years look like for your career? What does it look like for your product? What does it look like for your business? And do the best to kind of flex those muscles as often as we can and not stay in that kind of day-to-day flow that we normally have. Secondly, invest in yourself and remain curious. Be introspective, assess where you are. How do you take feedback? Are you providing feedback to other people? Are you providing feedback to yourself? Staying curious. Tell your story. Practice how you tell your story in every aspect of your life. Again, whether it's trying to get that promotion, whether it's trying to, if you want to move team, how do you tell your story that you want to be able to move team? If you want to build your team and you want to start managing or you want to take on somebody else's, like another roadmap, how are you telling your story to get buy-in? And then the fourth one for me is just continuing to grow. Continuously thinking about what the next step looks like, always putting one foot in front of the other, I feel like is extremely important, and just continuously just keep moving. And I think that's it. I'll say click again, but the last slide is just a thank you one. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you.
Perfect. So I saw one question.
And I ran over a little bit, so I'm not sure if we have time for.
Yeah, we have time for one or two questions.
Oh, damn it,
right?
I'm joking.
So there was one question online, and they asked like, what's your strategy to make your team more entrepreneurial?
I think the last slide kind of leads into that, is leading by example. My style is a little bit more, especially when I went into DAZN, they were quite slow moving and everything was, we thought about everything and our discovery was really long. I was a little bit more bish bash bosh. They wanted to plan a lot of user testing and getting this prepped and this demo prepped. I'm like, put something on a PowerPoint. Let's ask a couple of our most active customers. Let's get a bit of quick feedback. And just leading by example and doing some of those things really encouraged my team to do the same thing. It wasn't, I'm making it sound really simple, it wasn't as simple as that. It's also kind of pushing them to do that same thing, running workshops with them, being really transparent on, actually, this is the way that I work. These are the benefits of the way that I'm working. Is this like a journey you want to come on with me? And just having maybe that transparent conversation, but just leading by example and doing those things. And then one thing I found when I go to an environment that may not be entrepreneurial is I have to then verbally demonstrate the value of something that I've just done that may be kind of slightly different than the way that we're doing things internally. When I'm sitting in the office and I'm listening to a KSI podcast and someone's next to me like, why are you listening to that? I'm like, I'm listening to it because actually this feature that we built last week that's now got thousands of users on it was because I listened to the podcast and I know actually this is what this new demographic are kind of looking for. So demonstrating the value of leading by example, I think, is important as well.
Do you think like the speed and agility of entrepreneurs is the major difference between corporate life and startup?
100%. And it's being brave enough to kind of just roll and just quickly do and quickly get feedback and quickly learn. And that's, I don't know whether it's impatience or just the way that I work, but I am very quick. And there's beauty in kind of taking things a little bit slower and doing a bit more deeper discovery, but I would never want to hold back quick learnings from long learnings, and it's kind of balancing the both. But definitely that speed and being kind of brave enough to go and do that. I think a company I was speaking to recently, they're quite scared of launching things and failing, but there's ways that we can do that. We can kind of launch things to 1% of the market. Let's get a couple of our loyal users in and test things with them. Let's get rid of the fear and build a culture where we're not scared to fail, but it's learning.
I think we have a question. Somebody here? Second row again.
Hi. You talked about storytelling a lot, and I personally find it challenging, or I find it easy to talk about the past, like, oh yeah, I experienced this was the issue, and then you get a highlight and then the low light. But how do you tell the story, for example, the roadmap, like things in the future? How do you come up with that story? How
do I come up with the story for a future thing? I guess when I think about all my stories, it's the beginning starts now. So the beginning of my story is, this is the problem that we're having now. And this goes back to that being a visionary within your own right and being really future orientated. Before you've begun telling your story, have you planned out yourself what it looks like in the future? Have you convinced yourself what it looks like in the future? And we may not know the answer to that. We may not have been able to do a little bit of research, or we may not know the answer to that, but it's painting a picture of what you want it to look like as well. I'm trying to think of an example on my side, but yeah, like I said, when I was trying to not move away, but also start thinking about activation, I'd done no research really, but I knew I had data to say that we're missing something on the activation side. So I was like, this is a problem that we're having. We're spending so much money acquiring customers, but we're losing them. And I've got them hooked, the fact that we're spending so much money and that we're losing that. And then where I'm building up the tension, I'm like, this is the damage if we do keep losing people. We're going to be hemorrhaging this amount of money. They're not going to be interacting with all these features that the rest of the company are building, and kind of just building up this tension of what's going to happen if we don't solve this problem. And then it's also okay to say, these are some of my suggestions for solving this. I think that a simple pop-up that we could put up within a couple of days or a week, we can get some learning back from this, and this might be the result of it. And it's also okay to say, I may not know the answers now, but this is what I predict. This is my hypothesis. I went and spoke to a couple of people already. They've said that this would work for them, so let me go off and do it, and then I can get you results really quickly. I think that's it. It's always starting the beginning of the story is starting in the present, and then the rest of it is that this is what the future will look like. And it's okay if you don't know what it will look like, but it's having that hypothesis and justifying that hypothesis.
Thank you. Thank you,
No
Millie.
problem.
Please give her an applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.